As teachers, we've all been there, assigning homework, hoping it leads to practice and reinforcement, but does it really work? That's what we are going to find out today.
It really makes you question the way things have always been done. Practice makes perfect and all that. But when it comes to homework, the research shows that teachers and students aren't on the same page at all.
That's so true. And it leads to all kinds of interesting student behaviors like procrastination, forgotten assignments, even some pretty creative cheating. The book talks about all of that, but it goes even deeper, asking why students are approaching homework this way in the first place. What's the real reason?
It's fascinating because instead of just blaming the students, it looks at the entire system. When homework is all about grades and checking boxes, are we really encouraging a love of learning?
Such a good point. We want students to want to learn, to see homework as a chance to grow, not just another task to get over with. That's where this idea of check your understanding questions comes in. It completely changes what homework can be.
It really does. The author says that when we switch the focus from performance to self-assessment, we can really tap into that natural curiosity students have and help them want to learn. Instead of dreading homework, they'll see it as a chance to explore, make connections, really understand what's going on.
So how does this work? Can you break down how we make these check your understanding questions?
Of course, the first step is to let go of the need to grade everything. These questions are all about reflecting on your own work, not about evaluation. So no grades, no pressure.
That's a huge change for a lot of teachers.
Yeah.
But the book argues that even without grading, students will still learn. It might even help them understand more deeply.
Exactly. The key is to give students the answers after they try the questions. That way, they can see how their thinking matches up with the expert approach. They can see what they missed and understand not just what's right, but why it's right.
It sounds like it puts the student in charge of learning.
Exactly. And to really make that clear, the author suggests changing the language we use. Instead of homework or practice, we can call it an opportunity to check their understanding.
I like that. It's like a whole rebrand.
Exactly. And even those small word changes can make a big difference in how students see things. When we make it feel like an invitation to explore and learn instead of a chore, it can change their whole mindset.
This is making a lot of sense. But I'm already thinking about some teachers who might be worried that students will slack off if their work isn't being graded. What does the book say about that?
That's a great question, and the author addresses it directly. They acknowledge that some students might not buy in right away, but the important thing is that trying to force them to do the work often makes things worse. When students feel pressured, it takes away their motivation to learn for the sake of learning.
So it's about building a classroom environment where these check your understanding questions are seen as valuable on their own, not just something they have to do to avoid a bad grade.
Exactly. And it takes time and consistency to make that happen. The more we use these questions, the more natural they will become for our students. It's really about trusting them to learn and giving them a safe space to make mistakes.
And speaking of trust, how do we handle those students who need a little extra push? Does the book say anything about getting them involved without going back to grades?
It does. It says we shouldn't force them to finish the work, but we can make it more appealing. Remember, the goal is to make these check your understanding questions feel worthwhile and interesting. Think about how you introduce them, the words you use, even when you give them out.
So it's all about being deliberate with how we do it.
Exactly. It also helps to be upfront with students about why we're doing this. Tell them these questions are designed to help them figure out what they know and where they might need more help. When they get it, they're more likely to get on board.
That makes sense, giving them the power to control their own learning.
Absolutely. You can even ask students for feedback. See what kind of questions they like, the format they prefer, even when they want to see the answers.
I like that. It turns homework into a team effort.
Yeah. And speaking of teamwork, the book also talks about how this can work in groups. It stresses that even though students can work together, they still need to understand the material individually.
So it's about working together to learn more, not just to finish the work.
Right. Encourage them to talk about their ideas, compare answers, and help each other figure out where they might be struggling. It's using peer learning to help everyone grow.
Now, I'm sure a lot of teachers are wondering how to explain this to parents. They're used to seeing grades and traditional assignments. Does the book offer any advice on explaining this new way of doing things?
It does. Being open and honest is key. Start by explaining the reasoning behind the change. Make it clear that it's not about making things easier or expecting less from students. It's about focusing on deeper understanding and letting them guide their own learning.
That's important to emphasize. It's a different kind of learning, not less learning.
Exactly. You can even share some of the research from the book that shows how traditional homework can actually have negative effects, like how focusing only on grades can lead to cheating and memorizing without really understanding.
And wouldn't parents like the idea of their kids becoming more independent learners? It gives them skills that will help them outside of school, too.
Absolutely. And the book actually has a really helpful diagram that summarizes the main differences between traditional homework and these check your understanding questions. It lays it all out in a simple way that's easy for both students and parents to understand.
I like that. Visuals can be so helpful for understanding complex ideas. Can you go over some of the key points from the diagram?
Sure. It starts by comparing the words we use. With traditional homework, it's all about practice, assignment, collect, and grade. But with check your understanding questions, it's about opportunity, explore, reflect, and self-assess. It's a small change in words, but a big change in focus.
It really shows how language can change how we see things.
It really does. And that change in language leads to a change in what we do. Instead of marking and grading everything, we give students the answers so they can compare them to their own work. This helps them think critically and figure out where they went wrong.
It's about making homework a learning experience, not just a task.
Exactly. And the visual also highlights the importance of giving students time to work on the questions before they see the answers. This helps them think for themselves and develop problem-solving skills.
This is all really insightful. But I'm also thinking about the questions and concerns teachers might have as they try this out. The book has a great FAQ section that addresses some of those challenges. Let's take a look at that, shall we?
Definitely. I think this will be really helpful for teachers who want to try it but are maybe feeling a little unsure. Change can be hard, especially when it comes to something like homework.
So true. Let's start with a question that I'm sure is on a lot of teachers' minds. If I don't check or mark the check your understanding questions, how can I be sure students are actually doing them? What are some strategies for encouraging engagement without resorting to traditional grading?
That's a big one. And the book gives some really good answers. First, it acknowledges that, yeah, some students might not do the work at first. But the important thing is that trying to force them to do it can actually make things worse. When students feel pressured, it takes away their motivation to learn just for the sake of learning.
So it's about creating a classroom where these check your understanding questions are seen as valuable in themselves, not just something they have to do to avoid a bad grade.
Exactly. And it takes time and consistency to build that kind of classroom. The more we use these questions, the more normal they will become for students.
I imagine it also helps if the questions themselves are interesting and relevant to students' lives.
Absolutely. That's another point the book makes. It encourages teachers to be creative when they design these questions. Think about how you can connect them to students' interests, what's happening in the world, or real-life situations.
So it's not just about copying the questions they might see on a test. It's about making them curious and wanting to learn more.
Exactly. The book even suggests asking students what kind of questions they find interesting and challenging. You might be surprised by what they say.
Another question that comes up a lot is about working together. The book is clear that each student needs to understand the material on their own, even when they work in groups. Can you talk about how to find that balance?
Sure, it's about encouraging teamwork, but also making sure each student is responsible for their own learning. So you might have students work in pairs or small groups to talk about the questions and compare their answers. But then you ask them to think about what they learned from the discussion and how their thinking changed.
So they're using teamwork to help themselves grow, not just to get the work done.
Right. You could even have them write a summary of their main takeaways from the group discussion or draw a concept map that shows what they understand.
I love those ideas.
Yeah.
It really reinforces the idea that even though they're working together, each student needs to understand the material for themselves.
Exactly. And this whole approach to check your understanding questions really fits in well with the idea of a thinking classroom, doesn't it? It's about being curious, taking risks, and letting students be in charge of their learning.
It really does feel like we're changing the way we think about homework. It's not a chore anymore. It's a way for students to learn and discover things on their own.
I agree. And that's what makes this chapter so exciting. It makes us rethink what we believe about homework and come up with new ways to help students learn.
And speaking of new ideas, the author ends the chapter with a really interesting question, something for us to think about as we try to create thinking classrooms.
Yeah. That question really got me thinking.
It's like a call to action, they ask. How else might we rebrand traditionally boring aspects of school to spark curiosity and genuine engagement in students? What do you think about that?
It's such a great question. It's like it's asking us to look beyond what we see and think about how we can make even the most boring parts of school exciting and meaningful for students. We saw how changing our approach to homework can make a big difference. So what other parts of school can we reimagine?
It's like we need to get creative and see everything with fresh eyes. What if we started calling quizzes knowledge celebrations or tests learning showcases?
I love that. It's not about evaluating them anymore. It's about celebrating how much they've learned and how far they've come.
Exactly. And it's not just about changing the name. It's about changing the whole experience. What if we made assessments more like games or let students choose how they show what they've learned?
Those are great ideas. It's about making them curious and giving them control over their learning.
And that brings us back to the idea of a thinking classroom, creating a safe space for students to try new things, make mistakes, and learn from them. It's about helping them develop a growth mindset where they see challenges as opportunities to learn and grow.
I completely agree. It's about creating a learning environment that's engaging, empowering, and fun.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. It reminds us that teachers have the power to shape how our students learn. We can stick with the old way of doing things, or we can create a space where students can explore, discover, and grow.
It's an exciting challenge, and I know that teachers with their passion and creativity will find amazing ways to make school more engaging and inspiring for their students.
I'm so inspired by this conversation and all the possibilities it's opened up. A big thank you to our expert for being here today and sharing their insights.
It was my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into rethinking homework. We hope you've learned some valuable things that you can use in your own classrooms. Remember, creating a thinking classroom is a journey, and we're all in this together. Until next time, keep exploring, keep innovating, and keep those amazing classroom conversations going.